Apology for the delay, for the break up in the session. So we have the Zoom account that we use for the webinars, and apparently coaches organized a meeting that they were not aware that we have another meeting at the same time. And so once they started their meeting, ours was automatically terminated. So I will finish the review here, and then there are some questions that I wanted you to think about and maybe provide your input. So hopefully you can watch this recording, and then I will send a survey right after this meeting, so that this way you can answer your questions in writing. But anyway, so with the kids, as I said, we do have a sizable group of applicants, but the big concern there is that it's a team-based project. And so if somebody is not performing well, the whole team suffers. So in order to make sure that only people who are fully prepared and fully dedicated and disciplined to perform in a project or to participate in a project like this, in a team-based project, we have this rigorous selection and preparation. So 4 weeks, every week they have to complete some training, and then using that knowledge take some tests. And so as expected, not everyone is capable of completing the tests. So some people just simply didn't show up. Others did show up, but were not able to fully, to sustain that level of performance. So they would complete the first test and then disappear. A few people completed all 4 tests, but the results were not quite there. So in my logic, again, is if they cannot answer the answers on the questions on the exam, they either do not speak English fluently enough, or they're not smart enough, or not disciplined enough, or not reliable enough, whatever the reason. So if they cannot complete the test, they probably are not ready to work in a team. And so it looks like out of about 1,000 original applicants, we will have about 300 people who have gone through the training and have proven that they're ready to be on the test. Now, as you know, for the universities, we have an optional fee of $250 per school. And so we make it completely optional. So if the professor says they cannot pay the fee, we sort of do not demand it, meaning that we're not in this for the money. And if it is difficult to pay because it's too much money, or because the payments are too hard to make overseas, we normally yield and say, okay, as long as your students do a good job, we are fine if you participate without the payment. So in reality, what happens is then most American schools pay. In fact, we demand that all American schools pay, with some very small few exceptions. And then overseas, it depends. So most developing countries say they cannot afford it, or in some cases, they literally cannot find a way to transfer the funds overseas. They have to get like a permission from the central bank in some countries and things like that. Europeans, again, in many cases are not paying, even though they have the money. I mean, they're rich countries, but they are used to education, higher education being free. And they say if it were, a conference, they would get the money to travel to the conference. But it's a payment for education. And again, in their budgets, there is no way to sort of make that payment. So as a result, we get some payments from the universities here in the US, a few internationally, and that's it. With the college, with the kids, what we did this semester is a little different than what we did last semester. So last semester, we decided to set the price at, I think it was $100 and something per kid, or reduced to $45 for developing countries, and the payment had to be made. So meaning that we figured, so since the payment is relatively small that we demand, if people cannot pay the full amount, I think it was maybe not 100 something, it was maybe 75. But if they cannot pay 75, they can ask, and we automatically approve 45. And so because the program itself is about 5 months, we would say that it's about like $10 a month. And we figure that even the poorest countries can afford it. And if they cannot pay even that, then the logic was that maybe they're just not interested enough. So we wanted to send a signal that it's a valuable program, and it's something that has some benefit, some value, and it costs money. This semester we decided something different. So this time we allow them to apply for full stipends. And so if the parent says or teacher says we cannot pay, we said, okay, that's fine. You can participate for free as long as you do well on the theory tests. And another change that we did this time was that they pay only after they go through the theory training. Because what happened last semester, even though we had only a few kids, but some of them didn't complete the theory training, but they paid upfront as we demanded. And then we had to deal with the refunds, and honestly, it sometimes takes so much time, so that my time costs more to issue a $45 refund to like Nigeria than that money is kind of worth to us. So now we are right in the middle of this process. So the teams will be formed on Monday, and so we are done with the theory training, but we haven't formed the teams yet. And so that's the week when everybody should have paid. And again, as expected, not everyone has made the payments. Some people asked for an extension. Some people, when the time came to pay, said, oh, I can't. And then some simply didn't say anything. And so I'm kind of curious to see how many people will pay for participation. With the 250 kids, and some of them are plus or minus or 300. Some of them are from schools. Some of them are individual participants. About half asked for full stipend, and the half of the remaining half asked for $45 instead of $75, if I remember the numbers correctly. But if everyone were to pay, we would raise, I think it's about like $5,000 total, which is not much at all, because the guy who's helping me, I hired him, I pay him $400 a month for his help. It's been now quite some time, so he cost us quite, if you add up all his salary, so by now it's probably, about that amount. Then add to that the advertisement. So it looks like if everyone pays, we will roughly cover all our expenses, and we can continue testing the program. But at the same time, it doesn't look like we will be able to make any profit, even if we make a little bit more than we spent. We're talking about like a few extra $100, maybe $1,000. So we'll see how it goes. But unfortunately, at this time, it doesn't generate any revenue. If we lose, we won't lose much, because we do generate something, and it seems like it should be enough to cover the expenses, but it doesn't generate more than what it cost us, at least not more, to the extent where, for example, I don't know, for all this extra work, I can pay a little bonus to myself, or maybe set something aside for travel stipends. No, it doesn't look like that. But what's encouraging is that, people are applying, and the program is being tested, and it's working. And so let's see how it goes this semester. Hopefully by next semester, we'll have many more applicants, because we now know what kind of ads work. And I don't know, if we increase the number of participants, let's say to 1,000 or more, we may actually generate some bigger funds. So that's the kids. As I said, very, very excited about that. So we'll see how it goes. But so far, we know that there is demand for a program like this. We know that kids who participate love it. Many came, in fact, almost all who participated last semester wanted to participate again. So we know the idea is viable. We just need to find now a way to make it sustainable economically. Maybe charge more, maybe increase the number of participants. So we'll see. The ideal scenario, obviously, here would be to generate enough funds to be able to hire a full-time manager for the program. I am literally super overwhelmed managing it all. I mean, it's very, very demanding. So I'm definitely spending 40 hours, if not more, on X-Culture. And lately it's been like half of this time, if not more, the kids program. So I can probably survive like this maybe for another semester. But if it doesn't start generating enough funds to hire someone full-time to relieve me of those duties, it wouldn't make sense to carry on, because it's just too much work for me. And so I wouldn't be even interested in doing that, even if I were able to pay myself, at least, without some huge amount. And so the plan is to, make it work, standardize everything, develop all the procedures, and then hire someone who will do the everyday management, so that I can do kind of higher level planning, and then we'll see how that goes. But again, looks very promising, and it does look like it can be easily scaled up to thousands of participants every semester. And if so, even with the fees we have in place now, if more people participated, it can actually be sustainable and can actually work. And I'm very excited and want to see what comes out of it. Then, and again, yes, if it doesn't, become a cash generating program, may even be, viable or reasonable to separate it into a separate company so that we don't use the limited X-Culture resources for this sort of different program. One more thing about kids that I wanted to say is that one of the challenges here is that unlike the university program, the kids programs don't have really super qualified professors. So with X-Culture University, we don't really need, it's not that we don't need money, so we do need resources, but we technically can manage it on enthusiasm only, because we have all these highly qualified professors like you who are willing to share your time. And so every time I do need help, all I have to do is just ask, and people like you, other professors come forward and offer their help. An hour here, an hour there, advice, help with research, help with organizing the symposium, hackathon, all those things. And so this makes it very manageable, even though we don't really make any money. Nobody's on the salary except for a couple of people who help us, like a few assistants who help me. And even they are like way below the market value, but at least for them, they makes kind of worthwhile their time. So they do like routine work, but that's fine. So we get some research out of this. We get some, students are happier. So we know why we do it. So for me, the benefits are so great. And I hope for you that, we are not paid for doing this extra work, but we definitely, find it worthwhile through the extra happiness of our students, extra publications, sort of, like an interest in online research lab. With the kids, unfortunately, we don't have adults, highly trained adults who are interested in this program kind of intrinsically. We have parents, but most of them are not qualified to help with the program. Most of them are not interested and capable of helping us here. So, maybe occasionally some parent, but it's not like you have, a bunch of PhDs for whom a program like this is part of the job. So they just come so that we entertain their kids, essentially, right? One hope I have is that maybe we will be able to find professors, School of Education right here across I'm not sure if you see it through the window, that's the School of Education here. And so I suspect some of those professors may be interested in helping us manage this project so that they can use it as a research site. And if so, that would be a very interesting outcome. So they can basically use X-Culture Kids for the purposes that we use X-Culture, University. So if we were to find professors, again, school teachers, probably not quite the same material. Their qualifications are a little lower, they are overworked a little bit more, and they don't have to do the research. But if we were to find professors at the schools of education who would see this as a wonderful research opportunity, we may actually run it as we run X-Culture University, with the professors doing the kids' work, and we are doing the university work, and then we're sort of sharing the resources and promotion and whatever else. So in that case, it may be viable and may work even without any external support. So this is the kids. Now, a whole different one, X-Culture Hackathon. So this is a new exciting thing that we started doing 2 years ago for the first time, but did really serious tests in 2018, and it went very, very well. So we will do it again in 2019. The hackathon idea is, or hackathon concept is kind of surfaced or was conceived in 2016 when we had one of the X-Culture conferences aboard of a cruise ship. And unlike a regular conference like Academy of Management or Academy of International Business, where you go to a conference, you stay at a hotel, you go to the conference to present your paper, you may attend some sessions, but you sort of, the whole conference, you run from one session to another. You kind of do the name hunting, name badge hunting, trying to see your colleagues, maybe get a few minutes to talk. So on the cruise ship, it was a little different. For 5 days, essentially, we were locked on that cruise ship. And so we were spending all the time together. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, sessions, day off on the Cozumel Island. And so what we noticed was that those 5 days, while they cost us the same number of dollars, essentially, to attend, and the same number of days to attend, they were much more productive than the time at AUM, for example. So we had a group of, there were about 30 professors who have some association with X-Culture, and about 10 of them we spent all our time together, breakfast, lunch, dinner, and so on. And so we had a lot of time to talk about research. And surprisingly, not only did we go home feeling like we had known each other for years, even though it was only a few days, but also went home with a lot of research ideas. And so we thought, why not try to do that specifically for research, like the hackathons in the Silicon Valley, where a bunch of coders get at the Google headquarters pizza, Coke, and Coca-Cola, and nonstop for several days, intensive coding and competition and problem solving. So why cannot we do the same thing for research? And so we tried it in several different formats. And so the one is kind of all in. So we did it in 2018 in Wisconsin. The idea there is that we would select sort of the most boring campus possible. We would stay at the dormitories, very Spartan, very minimalistic, like very, very simple living. Eat on campus, use one of the classrooms or conference rooms for the meetings. And for several days, nonstop, we do research. So we select about 10 people. I think there were 11 of us in Wisconsin. And we had a couple of Skype meetings beforehand. So I did introduce people to the types of data we have. And we started thinking about the research ideas we can work on. But then once we arrived in Wisconsin, so day one, a lot of brainstorming about possible papers, what's publishable, what's not, what's promising, lots of ideas, lots of brainstorming. So we had like 50 paper ideas on the table to begin with. Then slowly, by the end of that initial session, we selected about 5 paper ideas that everybody felt are most promising. And it just happened to be that every paper idea had, I think we had like 2-3 co-authors for each paper. And yes, so next day you start looking at the data, start thinking about the research design. We do little kind of intensive thinking, presentation, feedback, thinking, presentation, feedback. And because we only have a few papers in development, only a small group of people, it's easy. So we get like for an hour or two, you think, you work, you think about the research design variables. Then you meet, everybody gets like 10 minutes, quick presentation, quick feedback, criticism, and go and work some more. And so by the end of the first day, we had the paper ideas. The end of the second day, you have a very clear research design. You have the data ready. You start running the analysis. Third day, you basically have your initial results. So you know if your data holds water, idea, if your data support the idea. And so since every paper had 2-3 co-authors, while somebody's working on the data, somebody started looking for the literature, somebody started writing up the paper. And so only in a few days, we had 3 nights, 4 days in Wisconsin, and then we transitioned to the Academy of International Business in Minneapolis. So we had additional few meetings during those 3 days. So in those few days, we were able to basically go from idea to not quite a finished paper, but to having enough on paper that you can say that I have a study that is, more or less not quite finished in a paper, but finished as a study. And so then we went home, continued working on that. And so even some of those already led to more or less fully developed papers. So the idea there is that when you do research, it may take you a year or more to write a paper. But the truth is, it doesn't take a year or more. It takes about 100 hours of actual work. The reason it takes you a year or two is because you find a few hours here, then you may have a break of a few weeks, then you take a few more hours, and so on and so on. And so that's why it takes so long. So here we compress those 100 hours like in 4 days, and maybe 7 days because you also have the conference. And so going home, you're like 80% done. So you just continue, you get a clean set of results maybe at home. You start, writing up a clean version of the paper, but so that worked very, very well. And so we tried a few other models, like at the hackathons, at the symposia in Italy and in Miami. We had the same idea for 5 days there, but it was 2 hours a day. And so that was not enough to develop, start running the analysis and develop a paper, but at least it was enough to develop a full plan for the study. Like, exactly what the question is, hypotheses, theory, research design, variables. So you have, who's working on the study, who your co-authors should be, who does what. So you go home with a very clear plan that you just follow and finish up as you go home. And then we did another one here in Greensboro, same thing, but it was only essentially 1.5 days. So one full day of work and one day before that, like evening of the day before. So it's like 1.5 days, same thing. So you cannot really start writing the paper yet, but you can develop all the details. So after you go home, you keep working on that. And so this time we want to do the same thing. So we want to do the full in and the symposium one. So in Denmark, right before the Academy of International Business, we will have a hackathon for several days in Denmark, and it will be again deliberately not in Copenhagen, where you have a lot of distractions, where you have a lot of exciting things, museums, sightseeing. It will be in a smaller university of southern Denmark, smaller town, not too far, where you can kind of switch off all the communication devices. There is really not much else going on, so you can focus on research. And so we'll do that one. So it will be 4 days in that smaller town and then several more days in Denmark. And so the hope is to go home with the idea, co-authors, and if not a finished paper, then at least, preliminary results and something on paper. And then we'll do also one in Calgary. So there it will be a 6-day event, the symposium. And so we can plan to allocate a few hours each day. So it will not be nonstop marathon. It will be like a series of sprints. And again, so we'll see how far it goes. So very exciting. And so for these, we are actually inviting people also from beyond the X-Culture Network. So anyone can apply. We want to keep it at about 10 people per symposium or hackathon. We don't want to have many more because once it's bigger, you kind of have a whole different group dynamics. So not everyone can talk to everyone. If you go to lunch, you cannot sit all at the same table. If you want to go in that intensive schedule where, you work for a couple of hours, you do presentations, feedback, criticism, work for a few more hours, presentation, feedback, criticism. So if it's too many people, then the presentations will take too long. So here we want to have like 3, 4, maybe 5 papers at most, each with 2, 3 co-authors. So that's the plan. And so that's exactly the idea. And so we will be inviting people, like literally once I'm done with this presentation, I'll start inviting people to the event in Denmark, and then we already sent out the invitations to the people in Calgary. So that's Hackathon. Those are all of the programs. Now let me leave you with a few questions, and I'll send you the survey so maybe you can give us a little bit more information. So free riders, we talked about that, and I wanted to hear your ideas for how else we can minimize the problem. As I said, the problem may not be as big as it looms. So we do research, and while it looks like it's an issue, in reality, it's not as bad, but it does happen. And most teams experience at least some, team members not being fully active. So I suppose we can do 2 things here. First, we can be more selective. So kind of identify early on who potentially can be a free rider and maybe not allow them to participate. Can we maybe, detect that by their performance in the readiness test? Can we make the readiness test more difficult so that it's easier to detect slackers? I hope you understand that there is a balance here. If you make it too difficult or too restrictive, some good people may not make the cut and may not be allowed to participate. Obviously, that would be a problem for the professors who participate in the project. What if, half of your class doesn't qualify? What do you do? Then second, once they are in teams, what can you do about free riding when it happens? Again, do we exclude people sooner? Do we set the threshold higher? And so if they fall below that, they get excluded. So do we look only in peer evaluations? Do we do something else? So if you have any suggestions, again, let me know. Again, the trade-off here or constraint here is that we don't want to exclude good people just because they were absent for a little while. Or maybe exclude people because our data predicts that they may be free riders, but we don't know. We don't want to also exclude people because, again, every time one of your students gets excluded, that's a problem for you as a professor. But then again, we don't want to be too lenient here because every time somebody is not dedicated enough, the whole team suffers. So that's something that maybe you have ideas. I would be very happy to try and implement them. Another one is funding. As I said, even though X-Culture can survive without the funding, sort of, as long as we all helping, it would be very nice to have some money to hire professional help. At this time, we rely primarily on graduate students, and the problem with them is that first, they don't care that much. I mean, in fact, many of them expect that if they get a graduate scholarship, they will not be expected to work too much. And so when I push them to the full extent, some of them sort of rebel and say, oh, people who are assigned to other professors just show up once a month for a few hours, and that's all they do, and you make me work every single minute. So I can use their help. I have, for example, 2 graduate assistants this semester. But as I said, one of them, Simone, whom you may have met, is excellent. The other one, a little bit less reliable, and he's only the first semester here. So it often takes me more time to explain what needs to be done than to do it myself. And then I'm not sure if the other guy will be with me alone, so I may spend more time on explaining the things this semester and then not even have him next semester when he finally will be trained enough to provide some help autonomously. Simona will be graduating also in a couple of semesters, so we have to start thinking about succession here. I do have 2 assistants in Ukraine whom I pay, and they sort of work full-time for me. They cost me cost now $550. He started at about $200 and increased $50 each semester, kind of retention bonus if you want. And he's now very, very skilled. So anything that comes to data, he manages all of that, and very convenient. So he's definitely worth every penny, and definitely worth it. The other one gets $400, and so he does several things. He helps Leilani with preparation of the symposium in Calgary. He helps me with X-Culture Kids, and then helps occasionally with a few other things. And then my wife also helps as much as she can, although, again, she's becoming busier because she's also a full-time student. And so I also pay her a little bit, but again, I'm not sure how long I can rely on her. It's a very convenient arrangement because she's been with X-Culture from day one and had been helping for many years for free, essentially. And so she knows very well what needs to be done. I can come home sometimes at 11 p.m. and I say I need to complete something by by next morning. And she can literally sit all night and work on it. So helps a lot, spends about 20 hours a week or so helping me. But again, I'm not sure if she will be with me much longer because she has only one more semester before she finishes graduate school. And at that time, she'll probably get a full-time job somewhere else. So I don't think she will be able to or available to help much. Maybe a little here and a little there, but we'll see how it goes. So ideally, I'd like to have someone here in the United States who works full-time and helps full-time, not a student who will graduate in a semester or 2 and I'll have to retrain someone, not someone in Ukraine who may be very talented, very dedicated, but still not a native speaker. Still, like the Ukrainian guys, they do the kind of technical work, website, web support, data management, those kind of routine things, technical things. But I cannot really outsource to them managerial things just because, as I said, language is not quite there, and some understanding of how business works is not quite there. So ideally, we want to generate, 50, 60, 70,000, maybe even a year, so that we can comfortably hire someone full-time and then have a little money left for those other, support folks. And unfortunately, we're not there yet. So I'm trying to save as much money as possible, trying to be as frugal as possible so that we have at least, like one annual salary in the bank in case, something goes wrong and we need to hire someone. But again, not quite there yet. So we'll see how it goes. We did apply for a couple of grants and now waiting for the decisions. Theoretically or technically, they are for research, but we did budget there quite a lot of money for graduate assistants. And again, they will not be able to relieve me of higher level planning and, managing. But if they could take over the routines, that would still help a lot. And if they do all the routines, I guess maybe I can do a little bit more of that managerial work. Maybe even they can replace at least occasionally, the guys in Ukraine. So that will allow us to save more money. So maybe when the grants dry up, we have enough to be able to hire someone full time. So, but anyway, that's one of the challenges, never quite figured out where to get the money. On the one hand, it's good because we never, had the money and as a result, never depended on the money. If we had a huge grant and kind of develop the infrastructure with the understanding that we have the money and then the grant dries up, I guess the whole company would stop. So here we sort of, always operate with the assumption that we don't have any resources. So, but again, it would be nice to have them to hire help first and foremost, but maybe offer some travel stipends to the students, maybe offer some, bigger salaries to people who help. Because again, there are so many people, like, for example, Leilani, who organized this symposia, Leighton and Ernesto, who hosted or will host the symposia. the board members. I mean, it would be nice to have the money to offer, for example, some honorarium for this work, or maybe for some travel, or something like that. So at this time we can do it, but let's see how it goes. So another thing that I want to say with funding, and that transitions me into my last point, is one source of funding could be the companies. And I never quite figured out how to ask them for money. On the one hand, we need them as much as they need us. On the other hand, I can't really ask for money because I know that the work that students do can be useful, but it's still work of students. And I feel kind of, on the one hand, almost guilty that, I don't want to sell our students and pocket the money, sort of, even though it's, for the project. On the other hand, I don't feel comfortable asking for money for this quality of work. So maybe for some sort of sponsorship rather than payment for the participation in the project. I hear a lot that, some schools charge huge amounts of money for hiring a class of MBAs. I don't know. I'm probably not the right person to deal with this because, as I said, I always feel a little uncomfortable here. So, but it may be a way to sustain us because, again, like collecting the money, $250 per school, we spend a whole semester, 100 of over schools, some pay, some don't, and we end up with, like, I don't know, a few $1,000s. One single company, especially a more sizable one, can literally get that with one check and not even notice it. I mean, for them, that's, like if a company has a substantial revenue, a few thousand here and there, for them, it's nothing. And so the hundreds of hours that it goes into working with many universities, getting a few $100s at a time, can be offset with one transaction from one company. As I said, I never quite figured out how to even approach it. And so any advice and help here would be much appreciated. And that brings me to the last question, again, company clients. Again, on the one hand, we have a lot of companies that are interested in participating with XCulture. Moreover, every company that has ever participated, I don't think we've ever had a company that didn't ask to participate again. In fact, we have some companies that want to participate so many times that I literally have to say, no, I mean, let's take a break. We need to give new companies a chance. And so everybody comes back, like literally every single company always came back. And sort of at some point, I kind of stop offering them to participate again. And sometimes they come to me and say, oh, you didn't ask us if we want to participate this semester. And I say, yeah, but, intentionally. So with some, they specifically ask, and I say, well, let's take a little break here. But at the same time, again, despite that interest and the list of companies, it would be still interesting to see even more companies and maybe even more interesting companies, because again, we get a lot of requests from students or leads, but again, some companies don't necessarily, at least not right away, feel that they're getting something out of it, and so they almost treat it as they're helping us and not we helping them. In some cases, they enroll in it, but when the time comes to do the webinars or provide feedback to the students, they don't have the time. So if you know of any companies for whom XCulture could be beneficial, if they're interested in those ideas, in these talented young people, maybe as future employees, we actually need those leads. And again, if we ever wanted to turn it into sort of, profit-making machine, or maybe some sort of sponsorship machine, again, the more companies we have, the more we can ask for some support. So that's where we stand. I will be sending you those questions. Thank you so much. And sorry for the technical difficulties and the time. Most importantly, thank you so much for being on this advisory board. It's your time. You don't have to do it, but you volunteered to do it, and I much appreciate it. Thank you so much. Again, at this time, I cannot really offer much in exchange other than the sort of feeling and promise that you are making a difference in the lives of thousands of students. But I truly hope that soon enough we'll find some resources where we can maybe reward you in some ways, as I said, travel stipends, maybe some additional support, maybe some other form of, recognition and support. So, yeah, but that's basically what we want to do. All right, thank you so much. So I'll try to organize one of these meetings right at the end of the next semester. This semester, so maybe sometime in May, so that we can review how this semester went and coordinate our plans for the next semester.